Take a quick trip down memory lane. Do you remember a time when you were younger when you used something that made you feel safer? Maybe it was a blanket, maybe it was a stuffed animal or a toy or a binky. Well, if you remember using a binky, you either have a great memory or you were using one a little too long. But anyway, that little bit of a safety outlet always made you feel more comfortable. And in today's NFL, quarterbacks, these big, burly guys taking hits from defensive linemen and slinging balls 70 yards down the field, sometimes they need a little bit of a blanket as well. And that's where the guys in this video could come into play, because when you're working out of the slot in the NFL, you become a very, very nice security blanket for your NFL quarterback.
Yeah. Analytics off the chain, all the channels not the same. Jake and Kyle, you know the name. Headliner Nation, we running the game. I'm a headliner.
Yo, what is going on, Headliner Nation? Kyle back with the Fantasy Headliners, and today's video is all about those wide receivers that work out of the slot. Why? Well, in my experience playing fantasy football for many years now, it feels like, those late rounds, when you're looking for guys at the wide receiver position to help round out your roster in half PPR and especially PPR leagues, finding guys that get a decent amount of volume out of the slot are always worth taking. The risk reward there is basically nothing, right? You're not risking anything with the late round pick, but if you get a guy that becomes sort of, like I mentioned in the intro, that safety blanket for a quarterback, you're going to have a guy that could see a decent amount of volume, and maybe he won't be having those big plays on the outside like some of the top tier wide receivers, but when you add in that volume and you put that in as like a wide receiver 3, it can really help out in some weeks and get you over the hump to fantasy football victories. But before we jump into all the information, don't forget the Fantasy Headliners Draft Guide is just a few weeks away at this point. Make sure that you're pre-ordering right now at thefantasyheadliners.com. That link is down below in the description. Go pre-order it right now, so as soon as it drops, you can get a hold of all of that great content. But let's jump ahead. All right, let's take a look at some of the statistics. And this video is going to be very similar to some of the videos that we have done recently, where we take a bunch of statistics, break it all down, average it out to get us a really good overview of everybody within this area. And again, all of these statistics are going to be based on snaps out of the slot. So targets, receptions, receiving yards, touchdowns, yards per route run, average depth of target, yards after the catch per reception, and then yards per reception. A little bit different than my big play wide receiver video the other day when we took a look at targets that were down the field, okay? Same stats, I just switched out the yards per reception. Yards per reception is now in here instead. And same thing, we're going to be going over each of these statistics and how it relates to targets where the player, or snaps where the player was in the slot. So those are the only statistics that are taken advantage of here. So it is going to be no surprise to anybody that the best wide receiver, or maybe it will be a surprise to you, but the best wide receiver out of the slot last year was by far Cooper Kupp. A majority of his targets, a majority of his plays, a majority of his snaps out of the slot last year. And it's very rare that you see such a big time wide receiver. And this makes his season last year even more better. It's rare that you see a wide receiver do as much damage as he did last year, basically exclusively out of the slot. When you take a look at it, it is crazy. Some of those top end wide receivers normally play on the outside, and yes, you will see them move into the slot every once in a while, but they don't dominate the slot the way that Cooper Kupp did. Guys coming in after that: Cole Beasley, Tyreek Hill, Tyler Boyd, Jacoby Myers, Christian Kirk, Chris Godwin, Jalen Waddle, Devontae Adams, Hunter Renfrow, Keenan Allen, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Cedric Wilson, Ray McCloud. Whoever would have thought that we would have talked about Ray McCloud this offseason? Ray McCloud, Jamison Crowder, Darnell Mooney, and Laviska Shenault. Those are going to be your top 17 players in targets out of the slot position. So those are the players that we're going to be taking a look at. The top 17 in terms of targets from the slot. Now, how many of those balls were actually caught? Cooper Kupp leads the way there with 117 receptions out of the slot. Then Cole Beasley, Hill, Boyd, and again, it's kind of surprising to see Hill have so many targets out of the slot. It's going to be interesting to see what happens with that now that he's moved on to Miami. Will Jalen Waddle focus out of the slot less, and will Tyreek Hill be outside more? Will they switch it on and off? Who's going to be the guy? If I had to guess, Hill's going to play outside much more than what Jalen Waddle will be. So looking at his type of help from either be outside or inside, it's probably going to be from the outside this year. If I had to assume, he's probably going to be on the outside way more often. Jalen Waddle will end up being in the slot, probably close to what he was last year. Then again, Boyd, Kirk, Waddle, Adams, Renfro, Godwin, Myers, Keenan Allen, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Cedric Wilson, Jamison Crowder, Darnell Mooney, Laviska or Ray McLeod, and then Laviska Shenault. Now, receiving yards. Who had the most receiving yards here? Now, even though Cole Beasley was at the top in terms of receptions and targets, Tyler Boyd came in second in receiving yards. His efficiency out of the slot this year was great, and he's such a good fit for the slot with Higgins and Jamar Chase being on the outside. Having Tyler Boyd is a guy that, I mean, he can win all over the field. He can win all over the field, but putting him in such potential mismatches in the slot where you're facing that nickel corner, or God forbid you accidentally get lined up against a linebacker or something there in the slot. Tyler Boyd is just a mismatch nightmare. His efficiency is very, very good. I mean, 856 receiving yards out of the slot. You know, Joe Burrow being another year removed from that ACL surgery, more comfortable in the pocket this year coming up. Obviously, Jamar Chase having, you know, maybe a little bit more eyes on him this season. It's going to be hard to do that. It's going to be hard to double team anybody. But when you take a look at who's going to be, you know, taking the most away from the defense, it's going to be Chase, Higgins, and then it's going to be Boyd at that point. So Boyd has a great opportunity to keep that efficiency extremely high. I mean, he's a guy as your wide receiver 3. It might scare you to start him every week because you're going to have some bad weeks, but for the majority of the season, you're probably going to get decent numbers. Maybe not high numbers, but decent numbers. Christian Kirk, you know, third in 809 receiving yards out of the slot last year. Where do they go with him this year in Jacksonville? I think that's going to be a pretty big question to ask because you already have Marvin Jones there, so you can put Marvin Jones on the outside. Then you still have Laviska Shenault, who you could put in the slot, also being mentioned on this list here. So who does end up going to the slot at this point? Christian Kirk. For me personally, I would rather have Christian Kirk in the slot and then have Marvin Jones and Zay Jones on the outside and then bring in Laviska Shenault here and there, do some different things with him. But Christian Kirk in the slot this year with Jones and Jones on the outside, again, another great potential for mismatch. And it's not like you're going to be spending a high price on Christian Kirk either. I mean, this is a guy that you're going to be getting in the 7th, 8th, 9th round potentially, where you take as a wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4, and you get decent output from him. And if you take a look, and we're going to continue to break this down, and I'll talk about it in our wide receiver rankings video coming out later this week. When you take a look at everything this year in terms of wide receivers and running backs, there's so much depth at wide receiver that there's a lot of guys at the top where it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to draft them there. So I'm taking running backs, and I'm going to take my shot at some of these guys a little bit later on. Chris Godwin, hopefully he's coming back super healthy this year. Cole Beasley without a team right now. Adams, Renfro, Wilson, Cedric Wilson popping up. You know, that's another interesting name to see come up there, Cedric Wilson. In terms of, you know, what is he going to do this year? Obviously not being there in Dallas anymore. So will we see somebody else in Dallas pop into this slot role? We'll have to keep an eye on that. Keenan Allen, Jacoby Myers. Jacoby Myers' name is going to be coming up in an upcoming video very, very soon. But he's another guy, late round stash, not going to cost you a whole lot. Could end up working out for you. Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jalen Waddle, Darnell Mooney, Jamison Crowder. Jamison Crowder replacing Cole Beasley in the slot there in Buffalo. So does Jamison Crowder get some of these targets that we saw pop up here with Cole Beasley? Cole Beasley being second in receptions and targets out of the slot last year. Does Jamison Crowder really help fill that role? If he does, half PPR and PPR leagues, you need to be adding Jamison Crowder late in your drafts. For receiving touchdowns out of the slot, no surprise. Cooper Kupp still right here at number 1 with 12, and then Hill and Adams had 7. Boyd and Wilson had 6. Kirk and Waddle with 4. Renfro, Allen, and St. Brown with 3. Godwin, Myers, Mooney, Crowder with 2. Beasley with 1. Shenault and McLeod didn't haul in any. Now, yards per route run. This is a great stat that I love to use. Essentially, how many yards does a wide receiver pick up based on each route that he runs? So Devontae Adams out of the slot last year led the way with 3.49 yards per route run out of the slot. The reason I feel like he was probably on the higher side is because when they get down a little bit closer to the goal line, they move him into the slot to mismatch him and get that outside open for him a little bit. That will lead to him basically being more efficient, because if they're on like the 5-yard line and he's picking up anywhere from 1 to 5 yards per route run out of the slot, he's going to be a little bit higher. So those high percentage plays that they run with Devontae Adams, or did anyway, last year or the last couple of years, that really helps bring his efficiency up. Cooper Kupp at 3.29, and then there's a really large fall off here, all the way down to 2.11 for Tyreek Hill. Only 3 wide receivers averaged 2 or more yards per route run out of the slot last year. And then Godwin, Kirk popping up here again, Wilson, Mooney, Renfro, Allen, Beasley, Myers. Boyd a little bit lower, unfortunately, but that's because he had more volume, right? He was out of the slot almost exclusively, so his numbers are a little bit lower. Waddle, St. Brown, Shenault, Crowder, Ray McLeod. Now, average depth of target, I brought his name up a couple of times already. We're going to bring it up again. Christian Kirk. I love Christian Kirk as a late round value out of the slot. Great safety blanket for Trevor Lawrence this year. Get the ball out quick. Get the ball out into Christian Kirk's hands and let him do some work. Christian Kirk leading the way last year, 11.8 yards average depth of target. Then Hill, Mooney, not surprising to see him come out right there. More than likely, Mooney will be back out to the outside more often this year. They've added a lot of guys, but Darnell Mooney is going to have to be a guy that unfortunately probably will not be able to move into the slot nearly as much, because they're going to need him on the outside as their main option. Cedric Wilson, Jacoby Myers, Keenan Allen, Chris Godwin, Cooper Kupp, Tyler Boyd, Adams, St. Brown, Renfro. Really surprising to see Jalen Waddle all the way down here for as much volume and as many yards as he picked up. But we talked about that in our efficiency and volume video, right? Really good volume for him, but efficiency was kind of down because he wasn't really getting those big plays down the field. You can see that again right here. His average depth of target out of the slot, only 5.6 yards. Yards after the catch per reception. Bring this back over here. Cooper Kupp, Cedric Williams. Why do I keep calling Cedric Wilson? Cedric Wilson, Chris Godwin, Tyler Boyd. Make sure you all are drafting Cedric Williams this year. Keep an eye on him. No, I'm kidding. Tyler Boyd again popping up here, yards after the catch per reception. He's a guy, high efficiency again, right? When you've got guys on the outside that are trailing the field, trying to keep an eye on Higgins, trying to keep an eye on Chase, not let them get by, you don't really have the opportunity to help over the top with a safety. So if Boyd can get himself a little bit of separation over the middle of the field, he's a guy that once he catches the ball, he's going to be averaging about 10 yards per reception because it's going to take those cornerbacks and safeties a minute to get turned back around and get over there to help out whoever's covering Boyd. Adam, Shenault, Mooney, Renfro. Renfro out of the slot, really kind of just mediocre numbers here. For as good as he did last year, kind of mediocre in terms of what he did out of the slot. Very surprising to see. But he can be in the slot basically exclusively this year, which he was for the most part last year. But now having Adams on the outside to really help as the alpha wide receiver, that's really going to help Renfro in the slot and bring up some of these efficiency numbers. Yards per reception. Again, no surprise about Cooper Kupp here, but Cedric Wilson, we'll get the name right this time. Cedric Wilson making a pop-up here again. Very interesting to see Cedric Wilson continuing to show up here. Now, what ends up happening with Cedric Wilson this year? He's in Miami. He's in Miami. Does Jalen Waddle go to the outside? Does Tyreek Hill go to the outside? And does Cedric Wilson play in the slot? Very interesting to see what they do with Cedric Wilson. I like the potential there for Tua. Again, really getting the ball out of his hands quickly, hitting some of these guys in stride. If you've got Waddle and you've got Hill on the outside and then Wilson plays in the slot, Wilson comes off the field and then, maybe you move some things around a little bit, get Wilson outside every once in a while, put Waddle in the slot. You can really they can get creative in Miami this year. They could get very creative. I would be willing to bet that the majority of the plays that you see, though, in a 3 wide receiver set would still potentially have Waddle in the slot with Wilson outside, or bringing Wilson off the field and putting them both outside. Those are going to be the main 2 guys, though. But Wilson, depending on what happens with that offense, just keep an eye on it. Christian Kirk, again, yards per reception, 12.8 yards per reception out of the slot. Big play there. Same thing with Tyler Boyd. That, if you take anything from this video, it's that Christian Kirk and Tyler Boyd are late round guys. Late round guys that I really want to have on my roster, in my lineup, guys that you could make your wide receiver 3 on a weekly basis. That, again, based on the matchup, pick and choose those guys, put them in. They could get you some really, really good numbers. And then finally, to average everything out, based on all the statistics that we put here, Cooper Kupp averaged out at the top, no surprise there, then Tyreek Hill. But then again, those 2 guys I spent the most time talking about, Tyler Boyd and Christian Kirk, very close, 5.36. Tyler Boyd at number 3, 5.37. Christian Kirk at number 4. Again, both of these guys, we want them on our roster. Trust me, they're going to be in more videos coming up. But these are guys that they might not win you your weeks, they might not win you your leagues, but they are going to help you get there because of how good of a value they're going to be and what they could do for you throughout the season. Get down a little bit further. Again, some of these guys just need to see a little bit more, a little bit higher efficiency or a little bit more volume for some of them as we work our way down. Good to see Darnell Mooney kind of in the middle there, but again, probably won't be in the slot nearly as often this year. Cedric Wilson, coming in at number 7 here. Very interesting. Again, I've talked about it a couple of times to see what happens with that offense this year. If they do go three wide more times than not and Wilson is in the slot, hey, another potential late round stash. He's not a guy that I'm probably drafting right away, but he is a guy that I'm keeping an eye on for our waiver wire, especially if someone were, God forbid, to get hurt. If someone gets hurt, then at that point, Cedric Wilson needs to be on our radar right away. And then Ray McLeod. We're not drafting Ray McLeod. Don't worry about that. But it is interesting to see Ray McLeod on here because George Pickens will likely be in the slot more times than not this year. Or Deontay Johnson might shuffle in there a little bit as well to see how heavily they were targeted last year in the slot with Ray McLeod in Pittsburgh. There could be some potential there. If George Pickens is in the slot, maybe not a whole lot of volume, but we could see a decent rise in efficiency out of that slot position because George Pickens is a much better wide receiver than what Ray McLeod is. So that could be something interesting to keep our eye on as well. But we're not going to get too crazy there because, again, that was Big Ben last year doing that. That wasn't Pickens or Chubb. So we'll keep an eye on that and see what happens there. But, hey, just another video to help you all out here. But I want to give away a draft guide. If you've been paying attention the entire video and you waited here till the end, I want to give away a draft guide. So do me a favor. Down in the comments, use hashtag slot and then list your favorite late round value at the wide receiver position this season. Hashtag slot. Leave me a comment with your favorite late round target this year. And if we get 650 likes on this video, I'm going to pick one of you that comment with that to win a draft guide. So hit the like button, leave that comment down below. And if you're new here to the Fantasy Headliners, you got to hit the subscribe button and stick around. But appreciate everybody tuning in to this video. Lots more to come this week. Lots more to come the entire offseason. Appreciate you all. Stay safe and stay healthy. And I'll catch you on the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.
Analytics off the chain, other channels not the same. Jake and Kyle, you know the name. Headliner Nation, we running the game. Y'all stuck on 3rd down. Your content's plain Jane. Headliners on top now. We gonna move and change. Podcast off the rip. Draft guide, so legit. Fantasy world, our game tight. You know we about that Chubb life. Stuck in a rut, and you need some motivation. Head to the channel for this Headliner Nation.
I'm a headliner.